I'm Sandy Smarco. I'm a principal designer at Frontier Developments, and I'm looking after Age of Sigmar, Realms of Ruin.
So, Sandy, can you talk about how this game came into being? Like, did you approach Games Workshop? Did they approach you?
Frontier's worked with Games Workshop before on the Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, and it was a very good working relationship. And we've for a while wanted to do a real-time strategy game. There's a lot of strategy game fans in the company, so it felt, it was just a natural match to talk to Games Workshop, and luckily they were fully on board, and here we are.
People like you and me, we grew up in like the prime era of RTSs, Warcraft, Starcraft, Command and Conquer, and eventually evolved into MOBAs. But what were some of the inspirations you pulled from the RTS genre when you were designing Realms of Ruin?
It makes me feel old now. So no, we looked at all of them. We think that the real-time strategy genre, has been up until recently a little bit underserved, but there's been some great games, StarCraft, 1 and 2, Company of Heroes, Dawn of War, but we'll look at anything, Age of Empires. We basically, real-time strategy games are a very broad genre. You can slice it up in many different ways. So we also were very much aiming for not a recreation of the tabletop war game, but we wanted to stay very authentic to the principles behind it as well as the lore. So that at the end of the day, that focused on the style of gameplay that we've got.
No, the most interesting about your RTS, I've played a lot of them, and a lot of them are usually they're complicated. They're very complex, in terms of like just mechanics and how things work and how you organize and your macroing and all that good stuff. But yours, when I played for the 2-hour window, was very accessible. Everything was very not overwhelming as other RTSs tend to be. Can you talk about that philosophy when you were designing the game?
Yeah, that was very much one of the watchwords. We basically wanted a kind of fresh take on the real-time strategy genre. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so that's why the core game mechanics are all there, what you'd expect in a real-time strategy game. You produce units, you upgrade through tech trees, and you go and stick your swords and axes in the other guy's face. But we wanted to make sure it was as many people as possible could enjoy the product. So that goes through to the controls, but also through to the rule systems that we used. We basically, it's a bit of a pick and mix. We looked at things that would give us the tactics and the engagement and the fun, but we wanted to avoid super complicated mechanics, because it can be quite a daunting experience jumping into a real-time strategy game. It's a relatively high. There's a relatively high stress level if you're playing against other people. We wanted to make sure as many people could enjoy it as possible. At the end of the day, we're in the business of entertainment. So what we wanted was not to reinvent the wheel, but to make sure that we provide as entertaining and engaging a product as possible for people to enjoy.
Now, in the traditional RTS, you usually have a base that you build up, but your game's kind of interesting is you have preset points that you select buildings to build on, but all the buildings gather resources. Can you talk about how that idea came into design?
Yeah, we wanted, again, we wanted a nice streamlined way of having a light version of base building, but that still gave us depth. So we rather than have freeform bases that were always in one spot, we started thinking, well, why don't we just choose the spots? And I want to be clear, it's not that we feel that we, in that particular aspect, this is brand new. It's one of the styles that you can get in RTSs, but our methodology, our thinking was, we provide the player with a number of locations to capture and build structures on, and they provide excellent points where you're going to have contention, right? You're going to fight, but also because there's quite a limited number of them, we give you these fun structures, and each structure has, it gives you resources, or it's a very powerful defensive structure, or it gives you vision. And the great thing is you can never have too much of them. You want as many of everything as possible. So the real strategy is, well, you can't often have everything. So it's what are you giving up? What are you choosing versus what are you giving up? You want more resources, great. It's not going to be as well defended. And that tied very nicely in with the general concept of our game being, it's about getting in there and fighting with the person. So we wanted to be accessible and also reasonably quickly paced the amount of time it takes before you're actually clashing with the enemy. So seems to be working quite well.
The speed of your game also is, I think, is very interesting and unique, where something like Total War is extremely slow and something like Warcraft 3 or Starcraft is extremely fast. You found this like nice middle ground of being able to issue units to your command, maybe watch the battle for a little bit and like kind of absorb what's happening at a regular pace. Can you talk about like how you managed that?
Yeah. So there are a number of factors. Firstly, I mean, I love and I want to make sure that we love all real-time strategy games. We love StarCraft 2 and the high actions per minute. We love Total War and its kind of grand strategy game and the giant battles. What we wanted was to have a pace where, like you say, you have a chance to absorb what's going on, because for a start, we're really proud and pleased of the visual quality of the game. We want to make sure that you can kind of enjoy it. You can get the camera in there and you look at all of the characters beating the seven bells out of each other. But also, it being a real-time strategy game, having a slightly more gentle pace means that you've got time to focus on more fronts at once. And it means that, again, it's a little bit less intimidating, but it really doesn't affect the level of tactics and strategy. So it just gives you a little bit more time to think about what you're going to do and make measured choices that have meaningful impact. We've got lots of abilities in our game, for example. Lots of these units have cool abilities, and they can often be battle changing. And you have to pay for them with resources. So we're putting a lot on the player's plate at any one time in terms of juggling their macro economy versus where the units are placed on the map, versus what they're going to do at this point, who they're going to engage, what abilities they're going to use. And what we didn't want was have such a fast-paced game that only a very elite few people who've got that kind of fine motor control and reaction speed can actually get the most out of it. We wanted an experience that, again, was as entertaining as possible to the broadest range of people as possible.
No, definitely for the minimal time I had with it, like after 2 hours, I was easily tab shifting through units using abilities, where like other games, one unit could have up to 3 or even 4 unique abilities, and then it just gets really complicated, and you have to be really, like you said, you have to be really on your macros. But this game, I was doing rapid fire, I was casting spells, and it was all in a very presentable, easy way to understand.
Well, that's good to hear.
Oh yeah. Another thing about your combat is interesting. So much like the tabletop game, when you engage in melee combat, you're stuck there until you issue a retreat command, which your hero or unit will run all the way back to your base afterwards and become unstoppable. Can you talk about like how that design came? Because that's so interesting in an RTS.
Yeah. Well, the genesis of that was when we looked at the tabletop, we weren't trying to emulate it completely, but like I say, we wanted to make sure that it was an authentic feeling experience. It was very important to us that working with Games Workshop that we do it right. And when you look at the Age of Sigmar factions and their rosters, it's very heavily weighted towards melee combat, towards close combat. So we thought about that for a long time, and it kind of it factored in well into our slightly more considered approach, rather than frantic clicking. That when you send in a squad of Liberators into an enemy unit of gut rippers, you're making a commitment. You're saying, I think I can beat these guys. I think I'm going to go for it. And yes, you can retreat and run back to your command post, but you give up a lot of time and ground when you do that. And our game is all about fighting over territory and controlling it. So it's we wanted to make sure that all of the actions were quite meaningful, so that you commit to melee combat. And also, it gives us a chance to show off some fantastic visuals, and the animators have just done such a great job in bringing the miniatures to life. So it's always a joy to watch the kind of brutal violence that gets unleashed.
Now, you guys had this really interesting pyramid of shield, sword, and bow and arrow units, and can you talk about how that came to fruition? Because that is a much easier system to understand than other RTSs that convolute. Well, this unit counters this one, but this unit like you painted it with a broad brush. It's very easy to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it goes back to this element, this drive to make it easy to get into. So yeah, we have like heavy units that are quite well armored, and they're protected against ranged attacks. So they do really well against ranged units in general. but they suffer from attacks from sword units or assault units who have got armor defeating attacks, and so that it's a combat triangle effectively, because the ranged units are very good at taking down the assault units. Now, that's not to say there aren't other subtypes in there, whether it's heroes and monsters, war machines. So there is actually a level of a layer of complexity under the surface, which you learn through experience, that certain units, they're really good against other ones that aren't necessarily on that combat triangle. But the combat triangle, it just gives a really great, easy, quick reference point of, if you see a unit coming towards you and they've got a shield icon, then it's always a good bet that if you've got a sword icon unit, that should do well against them. Now, there are power differentials. If you've got a very low tier,
the tiers,
and that's a very high tier shield, you're probably going to get pasted still. But it's at the core of any RTS. It's about it's quite capitalist concept of its economy. It's bang for buck. If you're doing more damage as a ratio to what you're dealing and to what you paid for it, then you're doing better than your opponent. So it's just that combat triangle. It's just a nice way to give players a head start into passing what they see on the screen.
And like, one of the most unique, like your game is, I think your game really is unique among RTSs that I've played the last 20 years. But one of the most unique things is you guys had planned for controller support out of the gate. Now, I didn't get to use it as much in the demo build, but that's something I've only seen twice in my 20 years of RTSing. I've seen it in Battle for Middle-earth, and then I've seen it for, I think, Halo Wars 1 and 2. That was it. I've never seen controller support for art. Talk about how that idea came and why that was important for your design team.
Well, again, going back, harking like a broken record, going back to this, one of the pillars of our game is it's making sure that it's, as many people as possible can enjoy it. And we also, I mean, I've done it now because I'm working on it. It's really great to play a real-time strategy game lounging on a sofa in front of a big screen. It works. It's no different to any other game in that you think, oh, well, you've got to be in a PC to play this. Well, you really don't. So the remit was, let's see if we can get this working on a gamepad. And rather than try and slavishly just match the gamepad controls to a mouse and keyboard, which is you're always going to struggle, we took a step back and went to first principles and said, well, what is it you're trying to do in a real-time strategy game? You're trying to give orders very, very quickly, and then repeat them very, very quickly, because you give an order, you assess what's going on, and then you redo it. And using the controller, we've come up with this system. We call it direct step, and it lets you lock onto a unit, orbit it, so it's really easy to see, and then kind of more like a commander pointing over the shoulder in a very intuitive way. You're plotting a route for a squad into the 3D world, rather than just doing it as a top-down view. It has a like a nice J camera swoop to our camera system, so you can pull back and look at it from a top-down view. But it suits well to working with a gamepad, because people are used to using playing third-person action games or first-person shooter games. It's the kind of, you go over there, and then we married that to a very simple system of, as you're pointing to say plot a route this way, if you're pointed towards one of your other units, you can just jump to it straight away. So you can just jump around the battlefield very quickly, get to do the things that you need to do in an RTS, which is get to the units you want to control, give them orders, and the orders are very transitory. You can just keep replotting them very, very quickly, very easy. There's no cost to it. It's fast. So, and it just feels like, well, I think it's quite a satisfying way to play the game, because it uses the controllers to its strengths, not its weaknesses. And you end up fighting the enemy rather than the controls, because we want everyone to play the game the way they want to play it. So within that system, you can also flip the controls into a more standard reticle mode, where in the middle of the screen your cursor kind of becomes a mouse pointer. So you can give orders in a way that's more familiar. But I'm really hoping that people try out direct step and spend a bit of time, because it becomes very intuitive very, very quickly. And of course, if you want to play on a mouse and keyboard and you've got a mouse and keyboard, we want to support that fully. That should feel just like an RTS, and hopefully it did when you played it. And if you've got a mouse and keyboard on a PlayStation 5, then you can use that. If you've got a gamepad on a PC, you can use that. We want to remove the barriers for people to get have some fun with the game. That was always the goal, really, with that.
You have two factions that we play, which is the Orruk Warclans and Stormcast Eternals. However, there are like several factions in Age of Sigmar. How did you guys go about deciding? You're all 4 factions at launch. How did you guys go about deciding what was going to be in your launch game as far as faction goes?
Exactly, it was like being a kid in the candy store and looking at all the cool different sweets. Well, we obviously went with Stormcast Eternals because they're the poster child for Age of Sigmar, and also they are fantastically Age of Sigmar only. So we had some concepts where we wanted to make sure that we were bringing new things to players. They won't. I don't think to this point people would have seen much of Stormcast Eternals in video game form. And then with the Orruk Boys, they're one of the newer factions. So we always want to make sure that we're trying to stay up to date and bring new factions. And they're great. They're a great foil, counter to the Stormcast. The Stormcast are very righteous and powerful and elite, and the Cruel Boys are just the opposite. They're detestable, but they treat everyone terribly. And but they have some great monsters. And the other 2 factions in the game, which unfortunately I'm not allowed to talk about. I'd love to, but I can't. Again, we wanted to make sure that we were very on brand in terms of this is an Age of Sigmar game.
But like, what if like your game releases and say like your people want Daughters of Cain and they're not in there, or people want the goblins and they're not in there? Is there possible for future DLC down the path of the game performs well if your favorite faction is not at the launch of the game?
So obviously that's probably outside of my remit, but
right.
But the good news is that the game does brilliantly, and the powers that be decide that they want more factions. As you state yourself, there are, I think it's like well over 20 factions.
Yeah, there's over several for sure, and sub factions. Exactly. Yeah,
and they're fantastic. Games Workshop, they've created a magnificently fresh, crazy take on fantasy, and so I mean, I'd love to think that there were the options are definitely there if it comes to it. There are some cool factions there.
And then last question is, when does the game come out, and what platforms will you be aiming for at launch?
Yeah, we're planning to release Realms of Ruin this year. So at launch, Realms of Ruin will be available on PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S.